Imagine, for a moment, the feeling of your own skin after 3 days without a shower. It starts with a subtle, tacky heaviness on your forehead, a localized heat that feels like a thin, invisible layer of wax has been painted over your pores. You run a finger down your arm and it doesn't glide, it stutters, catching on a microscopic film of salt, dead cells, and oxidized oils. There is a smell, too, not the sharp, acrid stench of a locker room, but something deeper, earthier, like damp wool and old wood smoke. This is the baseline state of being human, a physical reality that every person who ever lived before the modern era accepted as their default setting. And yet, if you look at the history of our species, there is a gaping hole in the narrative. We invented the wheel, we mapped the stars, we built pyramids that still defy the desert winds, and we mastered the chemistry of fermentation to make beer and wine. But for the vast majority of our existence, we lived without the one thing you likely used 3 times before leaving the house today: a simple bar of soap. It is a mystery that has haunted archaeologists and historians for decades, a case of a missing technology that was, quite literally, right under our noses. Why did it take thousands of years for the smartest creatures on the planet to figure out a chemical trick that is fundamentally quite simple? To solve this mystery, we have to treat the history of cleanliness like a forensic investigation. The first clue isn't found in a laboratory, but in the biological makeup of your own body. You see, the problem isn't actually dirt, it's the glue that holds the dirt in place. Your skin is constantly producing an oily, waxy substance called sebum, which, interestingly enough, is your body's way of waterproofing itself, that acts as a protective barrier. But sebum is a magnet for the world. It traps the soot from your fire, the dust from the plains, and the microscopic debris of your daily labor. If you try to wash this off with just water, you'll find that physics is working against you. Oil and water are famously unmixable, meaning that splashing around in a river might knock off the loose pebbles, but that sticky, bacterial film remains. This leads us to our first false lead in the case: the idea that ancient humans were simply content to be filthy. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that our ancestors didn't use soap because they didn't care about being clean. But the archaeological record tells a different story. It shows us that humans have always been obsessed with grooming. We find intricately carved combs, bronze mirrors, and specialized scrapers in the earliest human settlements. They wanted to be clean, they just weren't using chemistry to get there. So, if they weren't using soap, what was the murder weapon against grime? Our investigation takes us to the banks of the ancient rivers, where we find evidence of mechanical cleaning. Before soap, humans used abrasives. They used fine sand to scour their skin, effectively sanding away the top layer of sebum and dirt, a process that, while probably quite painful for someone with modern, sensitive skin, was remarkably effective. They also used nature's own chemical shortcuts. In the wild, there are plants like soapwort, Saponaria officinalis, and the yucca plant, which contain natural compounds called saponins. These molecules behave a bit like soap. They create a lather when agitated in water and can break down oils. But these were localized, rare, and not particularly powerful. They were the specialty tools of the ancient world, not a universal solution. This brings us to a strange realization. The ingredients for real, high-quality soap were sitting in every single human camp for 50,000 years. Soap is made from just 2 things: animal fat and wood ash. Every time our ancestors roasted a deer over a hardwood fire, they were producing the raw materials for a cleaning revolution. They had the fat dripping into the ashes, and they had the water from the nearby stream. So why didn't they see the reaction happening right in front of them? The first real break in the case comes from Mesopotamia, specifically the city-states of Sumer and Babylon around 2800 BC. This is where we find our first physical evidence of man-made soap, but the clue comes with a massive twist. Archaeologists unearthed clay cylinders containing a mixture of boiled fats and ashes, but these weren't found in bathrooms. They were found in industrial areas. This reveals a shocking truth that redefines our entire investigation. Soap wasn't invented for the human body. In the ancient world, soap was an industrial solvent. It was used to clean wool and cotton fibers before they were dyed. The lanolin in raw wool is incredibly thick and greasy, and if you don't strip it out, the dye won't take. The Sumerians realized that if you boiled the dregs of a slaughterhouse with the white ash from a kiln, you got a foul-smelling, slimy sludge that could melt the grease off a sheep's coat. They called it sapo, but they didn't want it anywhere near their skin. To them, soap was a harsh, corrosive chemical, closer to modern-day drain cleaner or bleach than a luxury beauty product. It was effective, but it was also dangerous. This brings us to a major clue in the mystery: the caustic barrier. Making soap is a delicate chemical process called saponification, where a strong alkali, the ash, breaks down a lipid, the fat. If you get the ratio wrong, and without modern scales and chemistry, they almost always did, the resulting soap is either a greasy mess that adds more oil to your skin, or it's a caustic nightmare that literally eats away at your flesh. For a Roman or a Greek citizen, the idea of rubbing a pot of industrial wool cleaner on your face was as absurd as us washing our hair with turpentine. This is why, as our investigation moves into the classical era, we see a complete rejection of soap by the very people we think of as the cleanest in history. The Romans were famous for their baths, yet they viewed soap as a barbarian invention used only by the Celts and Gauls to dye their hair a terrifying shade of red. The Romans had a different solution, one that used the principle of like dissolves like. They would coat themselves in expensive olive oil, wait for it to blend with their sweat and dirt, and then use a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape the whole mess off. They were cleaning themselves with oil, not fighting it with soap. But this raises a new question for our investigation. If the Romans and Greeks were so clean without soap, why did the world eventually switch? The clue lies in the changing nature of the enemy. For most of history, dirt was just dirt. It was a cosmetic problem, a social problem, or a comfort problem. But in the 19th century, the mystery took a dark, lethal turn. We enter the era of the great urban plagues, where thousands of people were dying of cholera, typhoid, and childbed fever. Our investigators at this time, men like Ignaz Semmelweis and later Louis Pasteur, began to notice a pattern that nobody wanted to believe. They realized that there was an invisible killer living on the skin, something that water alone couldn't wash away and that oil couldn't scrape off. Semmelweis, working in a Vienna hospital in the 1840s, noticed that women were dying at an astronomical rate because doctors were moving from autopsy rooms to delivery rooms without properly cleaning their hands. He suggested a revolutionary idea. The doctors should wash their hands in a solution of chlorinated lime, a primitive, harsh soap. The death rates plummeted almost overnight. Yet, the most frustrating part of this mystery is that even when the evidence was clear, the world refused to accept it. Semmelweis was mocked and eventually driven to a nervous breakdown because the medical establishment of the time couldn't fathom that a gentleman's hands could be dirty if they looked clean. This highlights the knowledge gap clue: you don't use soap if you don't believe in germs. To the ancient and medieval mind, disease was caused by miasma, foul air, or by an imbalance of the four humors in the body. If you think the sickness is coming from a bad smell in the wind, you don't see the point in scrubbing your fingernails with a caustic paste. The mystery of why soap took so long to catch on isn't a failure of technology, it's a failure of imagination. We couldn't see the microbes, so we didn't build the weapon to kill them. It was only when the germ theory of disease became settled science that soap was transformed from an industrial wool cleaner into a mandatory tool for survival. As we move toward the verdict of our investigation, we have to look at the economic forces that kept soap out of reach for so long. Even after people realized it was useful, it was prohibitively expensive. In Britain, for example, there was a soap tax that lasted until 1853. Soap was treated as a luxury item, like fine silk or rare spices. This meant that for the average laborer, a bar of soap might cost a day's wages. They continued to use the old methods: sand, wood ash, or simply the abrasive power of a rough linen cloth, because they had no choice. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution, when we learned how to mass-produce soda ash, using the Leblanc process, that soap became cheap enough for the masses. Suddenly, the missing technology was everywhere. The mystery was solved not by a single genius inventor, but by a convergence of germ theory, industrial chemistry, and the removal of government taxes. We finally had a version of soap that was gentle on the skin but lethal to the microscopic organisms that had been thinning our population for millennia. So, why did ancient humans never use soap for personal hygiene? The verdict is that they did use it, but they didn't use it on themselves because, frankly, the soap of the ancient world was terrible. It was a hazardous material used for stripping grease off animal hides, and without the concept of germs to motivate them, the trade-off of burning their skin just wasn't worth it. They weren't unclean. They were just using a different set of tools, physics and friction instead of chemistry. They lived in a world where the skin's natural oils were seen as a protective shield, not a dirty trap. They were doing the best they could with the information they had, navigating a world of invisible threats with only their visible tools. The story of soap is a reminder that what we consider obvious today was once a radical, dangerous, and expensive experiment. We look back at the Romans with their metal scrapers and the Babylonians with their wool-cleaning sludge and wonder how they could have missed something so vital. But the reality is that they were just as observant as we are. They simply had a different set of priorities. They prioritized the integrity of their skin over the removal of a film they didn't know was dangerous. They weren't waiting for the invention of soap, they were waiting for the discovery of the germ. And once that discovery was made, that foul-smelling industrial sludge was rebranded, perfumed, and placed on every sink in the world, becoming the silent guardian of the human race. Which brings us back to that physical sensation we started with, that tacky, heavy feeling on the skin. We now know that this film isn't just dirt. It is a complex ecosystem, a microscopic battlefield where your own biology meets the environment. When you wash it away tonight, you aren't just engaging in a routine, you are participating in the final chapter of a 5,000-year-old investigation. You are using a weapon that was forged in the industrial pits of Sumer, refined by the tragedies of 19th-century hospitals, and perfected by modern chemistry. We finally found the missing link in human health, and it turned out to be a simple molecule that loves oil and water equally. It is perhaps the most successful invention in the history of our species, precisely because it is so mundane that we've forgotten it was ever a mystery at all. But as our investigation concludes, we should consider the evidence that remains. If you ever visit an archaeological museum and see those Roman strigils, those curved, cold metal blades, take a close look at the edges. You can still see the faint, microscopic scratches from years of being dragged across human skin. It is a haunting proof of a time when we fought for cleanliness with metal and oil, unaware that the real enemy was far too small to be scraped away. We lived for tens of thousands of years on the edge of a discovery we couldn't quite see, held back by a lack of lenses and a misunderstanding of the air itself. We weren't dirty by choice, we were just waiting for the world to come into focus. And now that it has, the most important question isn't why they didn't use soap, it's what we are still missing today, right in front of our eyes, that our descendants will find just as baffling. Think about that the next time you feel the grit of the world on your palms. We've solved the mystery of the missing soap, but the history of human progress is a series of closed cases that only reveal more questions. If you found this investigation into the hidden side of history fascinating, consider subscribing to join us for our next deep dive into the strange gaps in the human story. There is always another clue waiting to be found, and another mystery hiding in the most mundane parts of your life. What other obvious invention are we currently living without? Let us know what you think in the comments. We're genuinely curious to hear your theories on the next great soap of our age. Until next time, keep looking closer at the things you take for granted. You never know what a simple sensation might be trying to tell you about the world our ancestors left behind. The cold metal of the strigil is a reminder that for centuries, the brightest minds on Earth were literally scraping the surface of a problem they couldn't solve with chemistry. They had the fat, they had the ash, and they had the water, but they lacked the one thing that makes science work: the why. They lived in the dark, not because they lacked light, but because they hadn't yet learned how to open their eyes to the invisible. And as you put that bar of soap back in its dish, remember that for thousands of years, that small, bubbly object was the most terrifying chemical on the planet. We have domesticated the caustic power of the ancient world and turned it into a bathroom luxury, A testament to how far we've come and how much we had to endure to get here. The tacky film on the skin of an ancient Sumerian is the same film on yours, but the difference is that you have the key to the lock. You are the beneficiary of a 5-millennium-long forensic search for the truth. In the end, the mystery of the missing soap isn't a story of ancient ignorance, but a story of how long it takes for a good idea to become a necessary reality. It takes more than just a chemical reaction. It takes a shift in how we perceive the world itself. We had to stop fearing the gods and start fearing the microbes. We had to stop valuing the purity of the skin's oils and start valuing the sterile safety of the laboratory. It was a long, slow, and often painful transition, marked by the scars of caustic burns and the tragedies of preventable plagues. But the case is finally closed. We know why they didn't use it, and we know why we can't live without it. So, the next time you hear the satisfying click of a soap dispenser or feel the smooth slide of a wet bar against your skin, remember the caustic barrier. Remember the Roman athletes scraping themselves with metal in the steam of the baths. Remember the doctors in Vienna who were told that their hands were the carriers of death. And most of all, remember that small, haunting detail, the microscopic scratches on the bronze strigils. They are the definitive proof that we have always wanted to be clean, even when we didn't have the tools to be truly safe. We have finally bridged the gap between the river and the sink, between the sand and the foam. And in that transition, we didn't just find a better way to wash, we found a way to survive. This realization, that the most basic parts of our lives were once impossible mysteries, is what keeps us searching through the ruins and the old texts. Because if we were wrong about something as simple as soap for 5,000 years, what else are we wrong about right now? The history of the future is being written in the gaps of our knowledge today, and just like the ancient Romans, we are probably ignoring a barbarian invention that will one day save the world. The investigation continues, one layer of grime at a time, until the next great reveal changes everything we thought we knew about being human. The mystery of ancient hygiene is a testament to the fact that humans are, above all, adaptable. We survived the ice ages, the rise and fall of empires, and the brutal reality of the natural world without a single bubble of lather. We found ways to be beautiful, ways to be healthy, and ways to be social in a world that smelled of wood smoke and sweat. Our ancestors weren't waiting for us to save them. They were building the foundation that allowed us to eventually save ourselves. They lived in the tacky, heavy film of existence and they thrived. But now, as we stand at our modern sinks, we can finally breathe a little easier, knowing that the invisible glue of the world can be washed away with a simple, chemical flick of the wrist. The mystery is over, the verdict is in, and the world is cleaner for it. As we close the file on this investigation, let's look back at that one small detail that often gets overlooked in the archaeological reports. In the ruins of Pompeii, there is a building that was long identified as a soap factory. But modern analysis of the vats and the chemical residues has revealed that it wasn't making soap for people, it was making it for cloth. The people living in the shadow of Vesuvius, some of the most sophisticated humans to ever walk the earth, were literally living next door to the secret of modern health, yet they only used it to make their tunics a little brighter. That is the haunting proof of the mystery. The solution was right there, in the house next door, simmering in a vat, but it would take another 1800 years before anyone thought to bring it into the bathroom. We are surrounded by solutions we haven't thought of yet. That is the ultimate lesson of the soapless centuries. We aren't just looking for new inventions, we're looking for new ways to see what we already have. And that, perhaps, is the most profound mystery of all. Not why we didn't use soap, but why we often ignore the answers that are already simmering right beside us. As you go about your day, pay attention to the things that feel obvious and the things that feel impossible. Somewhere in that gap lies the next revolution. The case is closed, but the investigation into the human spirit never truly ends. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the grease and the ash of the past. If you enjoyed this forensic look at history, don't forget to hit the like button. It's the modern equivalent of a Roman athlete's thumbs up. And if you have a topic you want us to investigate next, leave a comment below. We're always looking for the next cold case in the history of the world. Stay curious, stay observant, And most importantly, stay clean. The ancestors did the hard work of surviving without soap so that you don't have to. Remember those microscopic scratches on the bronze strigil? They are the silent witnesses to a time when we tried to scrape our way to health. They are the haunting proof that we have always been searching for the light, even when we were standing in the shadows. We have finally stepped out of those shadows and into the lather, and the world has never looked or smelled better. The investigation is complete. The verdict is final. Soap is the miracle we didn't know we needed, and now that we have it, we must never take it for granted again.